You're listening to Shorr Solutions, the podcast, where our expert consulting team steps behind the mic to share some of the strategies and solutions we implement for aesthetic practices nationwide. With decades of combined experience running and coaching aesthetic and medical practices, we bring you the guidance that strengthens operations, elevates profitability, and supports long-term growth. This is where solutions begin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast. This episode is going to be a little different from our usual. Today, I'm going to be doing a solo episode, and I'll be sharing with you how to create a compensation model that actually works. Or in other words, what's the compensation model that will keep great employees at your practice? And we'll get into that, but I will start by saying that no compensation model is created equal. We see this a lot in our clients where they want to do a compensation model and they don't really know how to put it together in a way that is still going to be profitable for them. And what many practices out there do is they just come up with compensation models and without realizing that that model is actually hurting them financially, that staff member is going to cost them more than they are actually bringing into their practice. So we'll be discussing what that great model will look like for your practice. And this is going to be very interactive. I'll be sharing my screen. So if you're only listening to this episode, I highly recommend that you can watch the video once you get the time. Just sit down, watch the video, because I'll be sharing a spreadsheet that we use with our clients when we're putting together compensation structures to kind of guide you through our thinking process and how we come up with the different models that we create. The model that I'll be sharing won't necessarily apply to your specific needs. However, the principles that I'll be sharing will be applicable and you will be able to use it towards creating your own compensation models. And with that being said, let's jump right in. And I'll start by talking about the biggest mistakes that we see often at practices. And the top mistake, without a doubt, is a practice owner looks for what the others are doing and then tries to replicate that. Like maybe they're looking to hire a physician or they're looking to hire a nurse practitioner. So they want to look at what are the competitors paying for that role. And then they try to match that without realizing that maybe their competitors is a hospital. So they are not going to be able to offer the same level of benefits or the same level of salary to that of the hospital. However, at a hospital, you have to understand it's a different work environment than private practice. So there are benefits and there are things that you can offer that are very unique to you and that you can tailor in a way that will be attractive to that potential hire. But it starts with understanding that you shouldn't be matching your competition. You should understand what they're paying, but then also understand that you have to find what works for you and for that position that you're trying to hire. Mistake number 2 that I see a lot is choosing a percentage in the case of compensations where you pay them a percentage of the revenue that they produce, but you don't realize what your overhead expenses are, what your fixed and variable expenses are. So you end up giving them more than you're actually able to afford. So that physician is not really bringing in enough profit. Maybe the revenue they're bringing it in, but not enough profit to make it worth that high compensation. So you have to understand your numbers. And a great place to start is just open your profit and loss statement and look at the last couple of years, how much revenue you have been producing, your expenses, understand your numbers, understand your bottom line, what is your net profit. And then based on all that information, you can make an informed decision as to this is how much I can afford to hire the next provider. And I'll put a worst case scenario where I will project the least revenue possible, because of course, a new provider is going to need to be ramped up and it's going to take time before they can be at your level. But it's understanding that at the very beginning, they might not be at their fullest potential. So being able to adjust your compensation structure in a way that will match potential growth. So you will motivate them to grow the business so that the more they make for you, the more they make for themselves as well. So with that being said, mistake number 3 will be trying to make that provider or that potential hire happy, giving them what they're expecting to get without you realizing that maybe that's not going to be sustainable. You have to really look at what is going to make them happy, but also what makes sense for your business. because what makes them happy is not necessarily what you can afford. So being able to communicate that you have a plan or a roadmap of how they can get to their expectation. That's the best way to motivate somebody and to let them see, I want to get you there. This is what we need to do. And set those key performance indicators and those metrics that are going to allow you to track that progress. And at the end of the day, they will be able to eat what they grow as opposed to eating what they kill. So that's very important. So those are the top 3 mistakes. With that in mind, I'm going to be sharing my screen. If you're only listening, I'll do my best to describe what I'm doing on the spreadsheet. But once again, if you have a chance to actually watch this, I would really recommend that you do. Okay, so now I'm sharing my screen. And what we see here is the typical compensation calculator that we use for clients. For this calculator, we usually have several columns, and in each column, we have a different model of potential compensation. Sometimes I can use the columns as a way to also do tiers on if you produce this much revenue to this much revenue, and I give them a range, then this is how much percentage you're going to get of the gross. And I like to use the gross as opposed to the net, because that person really is not responsible necessarily for many of the expenses. For some of them, they will be like supplies and what they use for providing their services. But for many of those expenses, they are not necessarily accountable for those. So with that said, what we like to do is we look at the gross revenue, meaning exactly what they bring in, and then we give them a percentage of that. And of course, if you're going to do it on the gross, the percentage is going to be less than if you do it on the net. So with that being said, let's keep it simple. So we're going to say in this first model that we have a provider, and we're going to be paying them $20 an hour, and they're going to be working 30 hours per week. And they're going to be producing, or we're projecting that they will be producing $10,000 a month. In that example, we will basically be paying them an annual gross salary of $31,371. And then a commission, which we haven't calculated yet, we have to define what that's going to be. How do we define what the commission should be? I want to make sure that the combination of both the salary and the commission does not exceed 35% of the revenue that they're bringing in. And why I want to be low? Very simple, so that in the future, if I'm going to give them raises, I have room to grow. But I never want a staff member to be costing the practice more than 35% of what they're bringing in. This is not accounting for other expenses. Ideally, we're talking about 28, 29% is the sweet spot, or what we call a 3.5 multiple. In other words, they should bring in 3.5 times more than what they're getting paid. So with that being said, in this example, if I'm going to give them a commission, I'm going to put a number as an example. I'm going to put 5%. Right there and then you will see that now I'm paying them an annual commission of $6,000 plus their base salary of $31,371. Now they are at a total compensation, and this is not even considering benefits if you're going to be offering benefits, of $37,371. Of course, if we're giving them benefits, we will put those in the calculation. But for this example, you can see right there and then that it's going to cost you 31% of the revenue that they're bringing in. Or in other words, the multiple is 3.2. So that's not where we want it to be. That's why you see in my spreadsheet that it will tell you it's not profitable. It's not really that it's not profitable, but it's not as profitable as we would want it to be. So with that being said, let's look at another example that might be closer to what we're looking for here. So let's say that's in this same example, that provider was able to bring in, instead of 10,000 a month, they're able to bring in 12,000 a month. By doing that small change, now you can see that there are a multiple of 3.7, which means that now they are profitable. They are where we want it to be. They are in that 27% percentage to revenue, which is the sweet spot for me. So with that being said, in this example of up 5%, they are profitable. The staff member will be making $7,200 in an annual commission, which can be paid by month or by quarter, depending on how you want to do it. And the total compensation for that staff member would be $38,000. So they're happy because they're making more money on their commission, and you're happy because you're being profitable off of them. Now, let's say that you wanted to raise their hourly rate. So instead of paying them $20 an hour, you're going to pay them $25. With that increase, you can see now that you're back in the red when it comes to that sweet spot that we have been talking about. So we want to make sure that if you're going to increase the hourly rate, we definitely want to set goals for them where we put a threshold and we say, okay, at 12,000 at 5%, you're not profitable, so I cannot afford that. However, if you produce, let's say 15,000 as an example, now you're profitable again. So whenever you increase a staff member's salary, you also want to increase the threshold at which they will qualify for that compensation. This is one of the many models that can be used. So I would say model number one, you can have a threshold. You can say once you hit 15,000, now you get 5% of the 15,000 that you produced, which equals, in this example, $9,000 a year, which will put the total compensation for that staff member at 48,000, which is 27% of the revenue they're bringing in. They are in that sweet spot. So as you can see, you can play with the numbers. And then if you want to have even more motivation for that staff member, you could say, okay, we're going to do a tier structure. And I'm going to still pay you $25 an hour. You're still 30 hours a week. But if you're able to produce, instead of 15,000, you can produce 25,000 as an example, I'll give you 10% of a commission. So right there and then, they can make more money. So now their potential commission could be 30,000 a year, but they will be bringing in 300,000, which puts them at 23% percentage to revenue. So they are even more profitable for you, even though you're giving them more money. You're giving them 3 times more money, but because they're bringing in a lot more revenue, you're able to afford a higher commission. So that goes back to what I said at the very beginning. If somebody's going to help you grow, they can eat what they grow. In other words, if they produce more, they can make more. And you want the staff members to understand that. So your model, you could have structured tiers where, in this example, if you get 15,000 of revenue, you get 5%. If you get to 25,000, now you get 10% on that 25,000. And you could even do another tier and continue to give them those thresholds where the more they make for you, the more they make for themselves. So in this final model that I'm going to do here, we kept the hourly rate at $25, 30 hours a week, but now we increase the revenue that they're producing to 40,000. However, we're going to give them 15% instead of 10%. So now they're going to be making a boatload of money, 72,000 on their commission, which is going to increase their salary to 111,000, and they're going to still be at 23% percentage to revenue. In other words, they're just as profitable, but the dollar number is going to be a lot higher. They're going to be bringing an additional $180,000 from their previous tier. So as you can see, there are many ways that you could do this. There are other models that we have done for clients where it's a flat dollar amount depending on sales, on skincare, for example. And you also want to make sure you put those into a spreadsheet like this, where you can actually calculate, is it going to be profitable? And at what point am I giving too much? At one point, am I being too generous? Or am I being taken advantage of? So whenever you do your next compensation structure, take a moment, look at the numbers, and see if it is actually feasible for you and your practice. And of course, you're going to be doing some real projections. And when we do it with our clients, we look at the numbers, historical numbers, and then we do realistic projections that are as close to reality as we can make them. Because the more realistic your projection revenue is, the closer you're going to be to a real calculation of, is that going to be profitable? But we also like to look at the worst case scenario, in which case are we at least going to be able to break even, so that hiring that staff member is not going to cost you more than not hiring them. Of course, nobody wants to do this business to break even, but at the very beginning, understanding that if they don't have a lot of patients, they might not produce as much revenue. But we want to build them up with our marketing, and then of course attract those additional patients so that they can produce more revenue, and in turn everybody wins. So to conclude this, I would share just a couple more ideas when you're looking at doing a compensation model. So number one, you want to make it healthy. Okay? So you got to understand your revenue. You got to understand that it's going to be based on what they produce. If it is only giving them money for being there and, just warming up a seat, that's not going to get you anywhere. And if you look at your current compensation models that you have and find out that they are not profitable at all, maybe you either need to, set realistic goals with them so that they can upgrade their revenue, or replace or eliminate that position so that you're able to actually absorb more revenue for your practice, or at least your bottom line will be healthier that way. And you got to understand where to let somebody go, and that's why we look at the numbers. And if we can let them know how they can improve so that they can not only keep their job but also get raises and get higher commissions, this is what we need to do. Number two, you always want to tie those incentives to performance. In this case, in this example that I showed, it was about the revenue, but there are other models that we have created where we also put certain metrics in place. And it all depends on what the role is. For a front desk staff, maybe they'll have metrics related to, are they booking those appointments? What is the conversion ratios? So these are metrics that we will use for them to be able to qualify them for a bonus or for part of that bonus, which you can also do that. You could divide the bonus in different portions. And you could say the bonus is going to be this much, 10,000, for example. But 50% of that 10,000 is going to be based on your conversion ratios. They have to be above 80%, just to give an example. If they're not above 80%, then you lose that 50% of the bonus. However, the other metric is going to be your phone skills. We're going to be listening to your calls. And if we notice that you're following the right script, that you are saying the right things, that you're asking the right questions, that you're doing your best to close that call, then we'll give you that other 50%. We want to make sure that you're following the right model when it comes to how you answer that phone. And you got to have scripts in your practice and understand there is a flow to that phone call. And we can get into that in another episode, but making sure that they understand that they have metrics. These are just a couple of examples. And then, of course, what's the profit margin? Because at the end of the day, once again, if it is costing you more than what they're bringing in, it's totally not worth it. And you got to make changes. And then finally, what do staff actually prefer? Because at the end of the day, yes, we can talk about what you as the owner are going to be happy with, but at the end of the day, is the staff going to be happy with that? So always make sure that whatever system or structure you come up with is going to be one that will build their trust in you. So they understand that it's not you trying to keep all the money for yourself, but that you're willing to share as long as you're growing together. If they help you grow the business, they will grow with it. And you'll be able to offer them even more benefits, even more things, profit sharing benefits at some point, if that's something that you want to do. And there are all sorts of things that you can do to motivate them. But for them to understand that you want them to be a part of your team, not just to be an employee. You want them to grow with you and to help you see the business as if it is their own business. Then you want to set those clear targets. People love clarity. And the more clear you can be when it comes to how you structure your business, having systems in place, the more you're going to build that trust as a leader, not as a boss, as a leader. And they're going to be able to have motivation. And finally, you will reward high performance. If you do those things, they're going to be happy. And you'll be able to have great people. You will attract great people and you will retain great people. So with that being said, I hope that this was helpful. And if you want to do a compensation structure with us, we're more than happy to offer a free consult where we can talk about, what that next hire is going to be like, how we can help you with that, and how we can help you structure a plan that is going to be appropriate for your current numbers. Because once again, this was an example, but we do create all different models for clients depending on what they need. So if you need help with that, reach out to us, schedule a free consult. You can find the link in the show notes, and we'll be happy to meet with you and to go over these things. And once again, thank you for listening to another episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Before you go, new episodes are released every 2 weeks, offering perspective on the decisions, systems, and leadership behind well-run practices. For continued insight between episodes, follow us on social media at Shorr Solutions. This is Shorr Solutions, the podcast.